Thank you all for joining us today. We're really excited to be here at BrandSquare talking to you about something that's very important to us as design professionals, decoding the meaning of design. I'm Rob Swan, if you can't tell by the little doodle picture of me on the bottom. I'm the Vice President and Executive Creative Director at Brandimage here in Chicago.
And I'm Michael Colton, the Senior Design Strategy Director.
Yeah. He of little or no voice today, so we apologize for that, getting off to a start here. So today we want to talk to you about how we leverage design thinking to better understand how to make design make people feel the way we want them to feel. So we start by asking the question, and this is a pretty broad one, what does it all mean? You know, simple question, and I think, you know, all you really need is letterpress and some colored pencils. Done. And you can figure out what everything means just by using those two tools. Well, maybe today we don't have time to get into the meaning of everything, but we can get into a bit of what package design means, and to us, how design is leveraged through meaning can actually help us understand how our work as designers can be more strategic, more efficient, more creative, and more impactful. And we hope that those of you watching will feel the same way when you come away from our presentation today. So our presentation is really broken into two parts. Simple. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about decoding design, and Michael's going to talk to you about actually recoding design once you've actually successfully decoded design. So the first part we want to talk to you about is decoding, and it's really all about understanding how visual signs, things that you come into contact with, information you're taking in through your eyes, can help address and understand consumer needs and then motivate their behavior. So first we want to share with you some general ideas about decoding, and these are concepts that will help build context for our conversation today. And we would like for this to be a conversation. Even though this is virtual, we're going to encourage you guys to note questions that you have along the way, and we'll try to do our best to leave some time at the end to answer them. So what do we mean when we say meaning? Well, we have a nice series of examples here, and it starts all the way back with Aristotle, and he asked this question: what does it mean to be a good person? And then Descartes said, what does it mean to be? And then Nietzsche said, what does it mean? Getting deeper and deeper here. Bertrand Russell said, what does it mean? C.S. Lewis said, what does it? And then finally Little John said, what? So you can see Little John is actually the greatest philosopher because he's been able to distill this down to its very essence. So we like to say that we make meaning, and meaning makes us. So if you go back to that Little John example, and you think about what he's doing, he's carefully manipulating his image to project to the world what he stands for, what he means. And one basic way to demonstrate this is the way Demetri Martin did it. We thought was really clever and does a really good job of showing how visual signs demonstrate meaning is beards. So when you see this kind of a beard, you say, oh, that's pretty cool. That must be a pretty cool guy. When it gets a little bit longer, you know, you're thinking, okay, this person's wise. They're knowledgeable. They've been around. Gets a little bit longer, and then you're starting thinking, well, that person's a little crazy. Might be, you know, Unabomber material going on here. When it gets even longer, well, then you're crazy wise, which is, you know, getting better. And then when it gets to this length, you know, we're just into full-on wizard. You know, you can't think anything else when you see a beard this long. So you're in Gandalf territory. So you can see how just the visual signifier of beards are actually projecting meaning when we see people with beards. Another example we like to use is this one here. You know, it's the Dick and Jane example, right? Here's Dick playing with his kite out in the yard, and it's fun, and he's out there doing what kids do. But if he's flying that kite at night, and we've changed one aspect of the signifying here, he's actually a little bit creepy. We look to meaning in a number of different places, and probably one of the most powerful ways that we can derive and understand meaning is through anthropological or mythological context, chronological context, historical context. This is a Minoan or ancient vase. I don't actually know what culture it comes from exactly.
Maybe
you do.
like Inuit or
Right.
some tribal primitive culture.
Long time ago, but you can clearly see just by looking at it that this is laden with meaning based on cultural signifiers. You know, people decorated this thing a long time ago, and it was very meaningful to them. Well, those types of things we actually see being borrowed when modern culture starts to try to derive meaning in package design. Here's a great example: this dark spice liquor eighth, where they're picking up on almost the same visual language and tapping into that rich vein of meaning almost visually verbatim. Same type of thing here. You know, this is a mythological context. You know, there's a rich story and understanding that crosses across, you know, virtually all cultural boundaries. The mythology of the sea monster is as old as time itself, based in reality and, you know, kind of amplified and built up over time. And when you see that put into context with things like form and graphics, we're getting a very specifically and meaningful maritime story that taps into our deep-seated and deeply held emotional response to the idea of a kraken. It's the same thing with human faces, and I think a lot of us have heard this before, but a baby's face is almost designed to be meaningful in signifying cuteness and adorableness. And the need to actually protect and care for them. So this bigger eyes on the head, rounder face. In fact, the circle is a very prominent part of the signification on a baby's face. Is something that we see picked up in our design culture to try to communicate to moms and parents, and also a broader audience. If you're a adult SpongeBob fan, which I think a lot of us probably are in the design world. Picking up on the same things to make us feel that immediate and understood impression of attractiveness. And it crosses over cultural and geographical boundaries. This type of language is deep-seated and intrinsic in human beings. You know, this crosses over geographical borders, and it's something everybody who is a human being can understand immediately. So we make that meaning, but meaning also makes us. We loved this example. This is a website that we found, and I can't remember the name of it right now. But it's a website that goes out and literally pulls people off the street in order to start identifying patterns of the way people are presenting themselves to identify veins of meaning. So this kind of messenger guy, urban aesthetic, is being represented by these guys almost in duplicate. And these are 6, you know, different individuals that were asked to come in and be photographed. Each one of them probably feels as an individual that they're expressing themselves in a unique and very personal way. But when you start seeing patterns like this for them, you can see that as a culture we're starting to sort people into a vein of meaning so that we can understand what their values are. You can probably understand what these guys' values are just by, you know, looking at the way they dress and act. Same thing with these gamer girls,
Run Lola Run.
Yeah, GRRLs, same kind of idea, and the prototypical, archetypical surfer guy. You know, the West Coast aesthetic that, you know, has moved well beyond the West Coast into different parts of the world, actually. So also, meaning makes us in terms of how we understand our world around us. So a lot of architecture, a lot of the most powerful architecture and industrial design that we see going on around us is derived from the human form. And, you know, just like we were seeing humans express themselves as individuals based on human intrinsic values, buildings are doing, and architecture and industrial design are doing the same thing. This is beautiful contemporary art museum in Milwaukee that I would highly recommend visiting if you ever get a chance. And I believe this was proposed for the 9/11 site. And Ross Lovegrove is an excellent example of someone who derives intrinsically understood and powerful meaning from human skeletal and animal skeletal forms. So the interesting thing about this kind of meaning is that it actually adapts and evolves. It doesn't stand still. Ming vases are very iconic, and I think understood around the world as works of beautiful and lasting art and craft. Well, what happened was that when the Dutch actually started trading with the East, they picked this up and they brought it back to their culture, and they started making it their own, and Delft was born. And the idea of Delft over time became intrinsically meaningful as a Dutch form of expression. And we all now can understand that this is, something that is intrinsically representing their culture and their meaning. And then you start seeing this same type of meaning being borrowed and leveraged to clearly drive some understanding of meaning for a package design. Font Vella here now, this package is a little on the older side, but still beautiful nonetheless, is borrowing that Delft language to bring a sense of sophistication and refinement to the water proposition that it's putting forward. And then you get something like this, and this is really fascinating because when we start seeing demonstrations of visual meaning being juxtaposed against each other, as Michael likes to say, mashed together, we're creating art. All of a sudden, we are no longer, tapping into veins of meaning that are intrinsically understood. We're creating new veins of meaning by tapping into those ones that are intrinsically understood. So Charlie Kraft is an artist who had the epiphany of saying this sophistication and refinement of Delft and the beauty of Delft, when juxtaposed and kind of broadcast against an AK-47, starts to portray a very powerful and new message of meaning. And so when we start seeing stuff like that happen, we're really recognizing that it's the connective tissue of ideas, and it's the way that ideas start to grow and spread. We like this map that you're seeing on the screen here because for us this represents the universe of ideas that has really proliferated impressively with the advent of the internet and the idea of viral ideas that can actually start conversations that grow and adapt and move into other areas. And this is an example of that. Just going to let this movie play for you. So that was an example of how visual meaning doesn't stand still. You could actually see a series of ideas there, and actually I'm going to use the word memes. I don't know if everybody understands what memes are, but they're ideas that actually live and breathe and can adapt and morph on their own. So you saw the idea and the cultural iconography of Star Wars move into this idea of keep calm and carry on, the famous British wartime call to action, and then finally into Mad Men. And so that meme will continue on its journey, and the visual means of interpreting it are going to be the way that everybody understands and gets it. So let's talk a little bit about why we get it, and this is all about how we perceive and interpret meaning. So we're going to do some exercises. When we originally presented this, we did it in front of an audience, and we were able to ask the audience to tell us where these go, but I'll kind of do it virtually here. Along the bottom, we see a list of values, and then we see on the top some visual demonstrations. So the idea is to tell which value goes with which visual representation. And this is a purely data-driven assessment. Obviously, we're not showing any pictures here. We're not showing any emotional attributes. We're just showing simply data, in terms of words and letters. Obviously, hopefully everyone could tell that was healthy, that that was ethical, that that was natural, and that was safe. Now, none of those actually said any of those words in them, so if you were able to intuitively connect the dots between those values and those symbols, that's where meaning is happening through visual terms. In one way. And so we actually think about understanding the perception of meaning as an iceberg. And what we just showed you is really the tip of it's the iceberg that you see above the water. It's the conscious perception of data. So what we saw were signs that propose a rational cognitive assessment. You were able to look at those things, read what they stood for, and then attach values to them. Here's another exercise. This time there's no words and no letters. And the idea here is that you connect the lighter with the individual above. And hopefully you were able to actually do that without me having to say anything. And the reason that you're able to do that is because, going back to our surfer guys and gamer girls, you're able to identify meaning based on the personality that's being signified by the people up above, and then attaching those values to the physical representation of an object, like these lighters below. So what was that we just did? That's really the subconscious at work, and this is really where it gets cool. You know, the subconscious actually interprets signs a couple of different ways, and this layer here is actually reflecting consumer sensibilities that are culturally defined. So those personalities and those lighters might not be as relevant to a culture in a different part of the world, but because those of us who are here in North America, I don't know if we're talking to people beyond our cultural boundaries here, kind of know what those different things are and how they connect with each other, because we have these culturally defined archetypes and stereotypes that we're able to tap into subconsciously to immediately make those connections. Here's another one, and here we're again looking at emotional representation attached to visual stimulus. So if we look at how these things connect, you can see how visual stimulus can evoke a visceral emotional response. There's powerful triggers that we can tap into as designers that help us understand how to guide human emotion, and that really is the most universal way for us to understand meaning. You know, the best one is, I think, the poopy diaper, which, by the way, don't ever Google like poopy diaper or poop on the internet, because it's just tragic. But it'll evoke a lot of disgust, you know, and that's, I guess, a great example of how we connect visual stimulus to emotional meaning. So that's really the bottom layer of the iceberg. That's the deepest part of our perceptual understanding of meaning, and that's instinct. You know, signs that evoke a visceral human emotional experience. The recent cigarette warning label campaign that the government's been working on is a great example of this. I mean, there's no more powerful way of trying to connect people rather to the dangers and the health detriments of smoking than through these viscerally, emotionally charged images, you know, combined with data. But I think people probably don't even get past the visual images. You don't have to read this to know what's going on here. So what does this mean to us as package designers? And we wanted to share another exercise with you guys that helps us understand how packaging can start to tap into this. So along the top, we have some more of those kind of archetypically represented human meaning forms. And when we start understanding how we attach packaging to it, it becomes very intuitive. It can, and very clearly and immediately understood which one goes with which. So, you know, understanding how that works, and then what we're really talking about is perception, helps us make design more meaningful and therefore more effective in motivating consumers. So what we just saw, you know, if you think about the need states that are being represented here from a consumer perspective, you're feeling like you need to alleviate shame and address self-image concerns. The package is actually a reflective surface. It's literally showing you yourself, which says it's empathetic and will help you get there. And then the end state is intuitively symbolizing, you know, becoming a better you. Just like frustration about invasion wants the empathetic resolution of violent action and death, and it intuitively symbolizes effective killing. And an aspiration to be special and desiring attention is resolved through an affirmation of status, which symbolizes being more like those you aspire to be. So you can see how packaging is connecting need states meaningfully with desired results. So we want to share the basic tools of decoding meaning for design with you guys. The way we look at it, Persian, I'll just throw that word out there and I will just leave it out there. There's three kinds of signs that can be represented visually. There's characters, and these are signs that are defined by convention that are rationally processed, like numbers, words, binary code, abstract symbols that we can understand because they're culturally relevant to us, but might be completely meaningless to someone who comes down from Mars. Icons are signs that relate to real objects, drawings, photos, facsimiles, things that represent something and therefore can be reused to broadcast meaning. A star intrinsically relates to a lot of different things, but in this case primarily to the representation of celebrity. And then indicators, which are signs that actually reveal the physical nature of an object or a proposition. So a reflective surface is actually, like we said, kind of acting like a mirror. Texture, yeah. And water drops on the side of a glass, say cold, and steam coming up from a coffee cup means hot, things like that. So how we think about these as signs, codes, and patterns. Those are the three kinds of signs. When you start actually combining them and put them together in different ways, you're starting to create codes. So if we think about Rockstar, and the underlying code here is aspiration and adulation, as we've kind of mentioned. And energy drinks are great because there's so many different brands to look at. But when you actually look across the different propositions in energy drinks, you can see the same code is being broadcast and used again and again and again. And it's all about trying to tap into this idea of aspiration and adulation by leveraging these different signs. So if you can't own a Lamborghini, you can have a Lamborghini drink. If you want to be like Elvis or Jimi Hendrix, you can be like that. If you want to be more like Little John, you can drink Crunk. If you want to be more like Hef, you can be Playboy. Or if you want to, I don't know, drink a Bon Jovi energy drink for females, which is always kind of an interesting thing when I say it, you can go to the one on the end. And that's a pattern, and we see these patterns show up again and again in different categories. And we look for these patterns when we're doing package design to better understand the most direct and obvious ways to tap into consumer understanding. So let's take a look at the iceberg in action. We talked about the iceberg of perception. That all happens, by the way, very, very quickly. In 2.5 seconds, every time we shop, we've got a very brief, limited window to engage consumers and have them understand the meaning of the message we're trying to get them to understand. And most of the information they take in, out of 11 million bits per second that are coming into our central nervous system, 10 million of those are coming in through our eyes. And only 40 bits per second are consciously retained, which is about the same as a 10-digit phone number. That's why they don't make phone numbers as 13 digits or 12 digits. And even the cadence in which we have to repeat them and understand them are a way for us to help codify and understand those bits of information we're taking in. So we want to take you through a journey with a friend of ours named Giffen, who is a perfect energy drink consumer. He's a great example for us to demonstrate how this happens.
Oh, this is so awesome. Just read Game Informer that new Darksiders game is out. Stronger apocalyptic zombies, more mystical weapons, hundreds of new worlds of Abyss on the way to the Eternal Throne. Friday night, parents away, I am going to play all night. Got the game. Alright, gotta get some munchies. Some energy drinks. How much cash do I have? Nice. 2 Lincolns and a Jackson. Alright, let's do this. Let's see here. Funyuns, jerky, Skittles. Alright. Yeah. Well, hello there. She is so never gonna go out with me. Time for some fuel. Now, where was I? No way. That's for chicks. Nope, not working out tonight. All right. Oh, yes. Animal energy, here I come.
So the question we like to ask at this point, because of course he's at the point of actually reaching out and grabbing something, is what's more likely to influence his decision? Is it data, or is it empathy? So when you look at energy drinks, and there's lots of different choices there in a cooler case, people aren't really reading labels. They're not trying to see what's in it. They're not trying to understand how many grams of this or how many grams of that are in it. They're making empathy-driven choices. So if you think about the energy category, amp is like, zap me now, my batteries are way low, or full throttle's like, I'm late and I need to stomp on it to get there. Monsters like, I got to release my inner beast to perform at a higher level. Rockstars like, oh my God, I got to get jacked for the club. We're going to party all night. And Red Bulls, if I'm going to perform like a champ tonight, I'm going to need strength and stamina. So, which one did he pick? And I'll ask my virtual audience, but hopefully you probably realized that he went for Monster based on his need state and the signs that were being broadcast to him at the point of decision. So if we break this down real quickly, what was actually making him feel that way? Well, this whole claw mark thing is a shredded surface monogram. It's an indexical insinuation of a violent force, raw power. This kind of green glow, this inner strength is a very magical thing, very supernatural. The typography that's being used in the word monster is this kind of pagan representation of mystery and sinister secrecy. And then you get this word energy, which is, a little out of context with the rest of it, but it's there to reassure them that this is actually formulated to work really well, that there's some science behind this. It's not completely cartoon-like. It's actually designed to make you into, or to transform you into this powerful monster. So now I'm going to turn it over to Michael to talk about recoding.
Okay, so this should be, excuse me, a bit of a challenge for me because I have to talk like an auctioneer and I don't have much voice. So let's see if I can do this. So recoding, now that we've a basic understanding of how to decode meaning, how can we use this understanding to recode meaning to create more effective design? So decoding and recoding, how are the two ideas connected? In decoding, as Rob explained, involves understanding the consumer behavior. And as designers, we're really well equipped to function as something of a modern day archaeologist or anthropologist, able to make sense of material culture and what objects mean to people in their lives. Decoding is like our designer's analytical process. And recoding then is the synthesis and rebuilding of these elements in a way that creates new meaning and distinctive meaning for ownable brands. So how then can we add this kind of value? You get a design brief. The moment the designer typically enters the design making process. So do these shapes look familiar? Within the brief, there are often these familiar shapes themselves, intended themselves actually by being a pyramid, a key shape, a house, a wheel, to convey meaning that represents the ideas about the essence of a brand and how the essence radiates outward to the world in the way that brands express themselves and answer to all the challenges of the brand. So at the outer rings, at the bottom of the house, we often see it's the foundational base of the pyramid here that demonstrates the brand character attributes that through design we have to express to convey the purpose, the reason to believe, and the essence of the brand. And designers must precisely express these attributes in order for us to control the way we want the consumer to think about the brand. There's a lot at stake, excuse me, and the intimacy between the consumer and the brand.
It's really that base of that. It's really the base where we're looking to get some guidance to derive meaning.
And unfortunately, we're often somewhat handicapped in our ability to make the brand ownable and distinct because we get words that are often vague or kind of general. So let's take a look. What are we really talking about when we say authentic? What is it, or what can it mean? You could see that we get these words, and we actually did a look at about 300 design briefs, and we could see that a lot of the same words and ideas come up frequently. It becomes really hard to create distinctive and ownable meaning. And in this age where brand authenticity, the origin of brands, very well-informed consumers are looking at products, authenticity becomes a common theme that comes up. And so we decided to take a deeper look at this in terms of understanding how to recode meaning. So what are we really talking about when we say authentic? Authentic is real. You can see that there are many interpretations of real, many interpretations of this idea. So what do we do to reflect this back to the client and, thoroughly cover on all the design concepts when we're doing concepting? So real, what is real? Real is riding on a log, not riding on a log ride. It's not real if its likeliness is without the substance or qualities of the original. As designers, it's our responsibility to be real as possible in fulfilling the promise of design, even though the elements we are using are actually implied real. Therefore, we can only really express real in degrees and then balance this with the broader mission of the brand. Our good fortune, though, as designers, is that we can creatively and flexibly borrow from many signifiers, dialing them up or down, while still communicating the meaning of authenticity. So, an illustration like a farmhouse, like you're seeing on the right, is we see it so prevalently, but when we really think about it, when we're talking about expressing food origin, many authentic ways, we have to actually get as close as possible to the source, actually putting our nose up against the cow itself before we go on and make something clear. Therefore, we're not making judgments about the quality of the product, but we're talking about expressing the meaning of the brand accurately. So here's an example. Another approach to authenticity, or proving that the product is trustworthy, can be done by using design cues that suggest that some formal organization or individual or entity has sanctioned and legitimized a product. Here in the case of the Howling Monkey, you can see how they have dialed up and down visual cues for certified currency, allowing for authenticity that can here interplay with humor. And it's fascinating here that in the same raw material, conceivably both brands drawing from the same bees can create two distinct impressions of authenticity. On the left, the suggestion that the product has been minimally handled and hand-packed, versus the right, the honey bear is timeless and trend-enduring. Both products seem unaffected and simple, but in different ways. So what do we need? We need these strategic frameworks that can identify opportunity for meaning in design. So in order to do so, we need to do the decoding work by exploring the broad range of interpretations of meaning in the hearts and minds of the target consumer, wherever they may live, working to understand ideas that hold in common and the differences in framing up those in terms of dichotomies. So what we typically use is a perceptual map that can help us define the landscape or perimeter of meaning within which those differences in interpretations can be made evident to the client. The map is very intentionally lines up with the iceberg that Rob took us through, that iceberg analogy, wherein both the middle layer of the iceberg and the bottom layer of the iceberg can be used to identify the authenticity in culture and the way the promise of authenticity registers with us more on a deep perceptual faculties and emotion. So as I go forward in the explanations of the quadrants of meaning, because time is limited, I'm going to really focus on the process of creating the perceptual map and trust that as designers and experts here, that we understand the content. So real quick, sanctioning. We saw this in the Howling Monkey example, traditional and cultural and societal signs of authenticity. We believe in these products not because of physical evidence that the product is real, but because of some certifying body has used well understood science to say that it's so. So as part of our process, we first look at the patterns. Patterns are the way that it's our scientific way to prove that our insights are legitimate. And we often will go through this really intense rigor, especially when we look at the products in the category and the competitive space when we're doing some brand meaning work, to look at when we really want to understand the way we can co-opt or zigzag from and create competitive space. So you can see here how in this next page how we can look at it. We can classify signifiers to link to bigger, more invisible ideas about sanctioning authenticity at the code level. And I won't go through these individually, but you can see how we get distinct signifiers. They're each unique, but all convey the bigger idea of sanctioning. And we can use these in a variety of ways, connecting the dots to build these bigger ideas. So by hand, evidence of human touch, made but not manufactured. Here we're going into this bottom quadrant where we're linking social ideals and this under the iceberg physical, in some of those indexical examples that Rob talked about. You can see here in designs that attempt to leverage elements such as hand script and readily available materials, or even messy, realistically shot product to offer physical evidence that it was handmade. And here again, the rigor of this design process, where we again function as like contemporary archaeologists breaking down the package into discrete signifiers. And then here again, the close-up on the distinctly meaningful signifiers that communicate the bigger idea. When you really get good at this work, and design has the power to save the brand from directly mimicking common category design elements that often intrigue and interest the consumer passing by. So untouched is another way of communicating authenticity as a product as minimally handled as possible and true to its origins, and such as the harvesting point, and it being relatively unaffected by man. Here are some examples of how consumers perceived untouched authenticity. And again, the deeper breakdown, a process we have referred to as portrait studies. And then again, the discrete signifiers that each imply untouched authenticity. And lastly, authenticity promised through designs by showing up as original, unusual, beyond trend, enduring, or from another time and place. The examples are often exotic, limited editions, or category rule breakers, daring to stand out in their category, real in that they are true to themselves. Again, a deeper look in this case, Absolute Vodka, always a brand that has been an independent spirit expressing itself freely and confidently. Here, borrowing meaning from far away, perhaps a disco ball. And as in the artistic example of the Delft machine gun, crashing together things to create unique and ownable meaning. And then those individual design cues. So here you have it, authenticity in all of its forms, broken down to show how much more depth there is to the world, so often vaguely informed by, often when we are faced with the client and some of the organizational challenges of creating distinct meaning, sometimes created by consensus building. So here, we, as design experts, we have an opportunity to come in and shift the paradigm and lead them through this process of decoding and recoding. I'm going to pass it back over to Rob now, who's going to drive it home.
Thanks, Michael. So hopefully this is a very 30,000-foot look at how you can actually take a simple word like authentic, and through understanding different ways to use signs to portray that, show all the different ways that authentic can actually have meaning with people. And as designers, we get these words on briefs a lot, and designers will do this naturally, and you can end up getting almost all of those, coming back to you, unless you're able to kind of strategically focus around what kind of meaning you actually want to recode and project. So what we hope you guys take away from our presentation today, well, goals as a package designer, what are you trying to do? Are you trying to create beauty? Are you trying to win awards? Are you trying to sell more stuff? Are you trying to make brands matter in people's lives, or is it E, all the above? And I think for us, it's really E, all the above. And this type of thinking really helps us get there. An example of meaning in action commercially, and why it's so important is these two, Craft and Tropicana. We have this before designs that were successful, and I think had a good deal of share in their categories. They both underwent a radical redesign where the brands repositioned themselves and changed their face and meaning dramatically. And what happened was that they actually ran into the buzzsaw of consumer acceptance because they did not perceive meaning the same way as they had traditionally. So what happened in the after here is that they redesigned to move closer back towards the meaningful signs that they had been utilizing in the previous iteration. So in the case of Kraft cheese, they needed to move away from this kind of more rigid contemporary architecture back to the source of where it came from, this kind of shop sign idea. And for Tropicana, clearly they needed to move back towards signifying the nature of the juice and the fact that it's as close to pure as possible. So brands that understand and utilize meaning really tap into deep emotional resonance and build empathetic affiliations and ultimately adoption with consumers, like the examples we just saw. When they're doing this consistently, they build trust. And as designers and as branding professionals, that's what we're really trying to do, is make people champions of our brands and put us on their list every time they go shopping. So like this shopping list we found here on a great website that shows nothing but lists that people found. Back scratcher, wig with toupee, Love Actually soundtrack, Chipotle gift certificate, perhaps Qdoba, a little bit of equity problem there for Chipotle. Obligatory frame picture of me, us, and a big thing of Diet Coke with lime, which of course is great for Diet Coke because they want those kinds of champions and that kind of affiliation. And if we do this, this is a great graphic that Michael worked up. We can actually be much more effective in the game of design battleship with our clients. Rather than trying to guess where the mark is and ready, fire, aim, we're much more successful in aiming design and hitting it right out of the gate the first time. And clients like that because we're more effective, we're more efficient, and we're ultimately more successful. So we hope we found this meaningful. I know we're a little bit longer than our time. I hope most of you bore with us. We will take some questions now, if you'd like.
So we have a question here about...
Don't answer that one.
Which one?
This one, within the sequence of events.
Don't answer that.
No, do answer that one. Don't answer
Okay.
that one.
So within the sequence of events between the brand strategy phase and the brand design craftsmanship at the end of the process, when and how is it best for the design team to step in as experts in design decoding and recoding? Very good question. You want to take a stab at that?
Sure, yeah. The answer is all of the above. I mean, clearly, design thinking and the idea of leveraging design thinking as a brand development tool is as powerful upstream at the top of the funnel in terms of defining the core attributes of how a brand presents itself to the world from a deep meaning perspective as it is from what it looks like. So, if you think about brands as human beings and you think about yourself, for example, you're influenced by the outside world. You take in information, you look at things, you adopt things, you reject things. All that activity kind of helps define who you are. and then all of us, and one of the magic elements of design is that we actually take those things and find those connections, like the Delft machine gun, and put those strings of meaning together and project them back into the world so that people understand what we stand for. And that's really what package design is ultimately at the end of the day, is assimilating values. It's design thinking. It's identify the dots, organize the dots, and connect the dots. So every step of the way, from strategy to manifestation. Trying to...
So another question. Authenticity is one area of expressing brand personality. Can you name any others and suggest how to go through a similar process?
Well, that list that Michael showed you it's a fascinating exercise that we did. Was we gathered all these design briefs and we looked at the words that people put in terms of the... We're going to run out of batteries. Yeah. That's going to be the end of our session because we don't have a power cord. We see the same words coming up again and again and again and again, and they can mean so many different things. So those basic attributes are the things that we like to look at. Michael and I, by the way, we're going to have a book coming out where we're going to do more of this breakdown of those different types of attributes and those different values. So those of you who are interested in this stuff, be on the lookout. We're in full development on this now, and it'll be coming out soon. We have a question: what are semiotics? So we intentionally didn't use the word semiotics in this presentation because semiotics can get rather academic, and this is really a design focused presentation. We've tried to take some of the most powerful ideas of Persian semiotics and boil them down, distill them down into their essence, so that designers who are not really interested in diving that deep into the academic nature of semiotics, thanks, Laura, can actually put them into practice without having to go to school, so to speak. So a lot of what we've been showing you guys today are the tenets and principles of Persian semiotics, and they're at the core of our design strategy practice and really drive most of the thinking of everything we do, from brand development, that top of the funnel stuff I was just talking about, all the way to the way we express brands in package design.
And I'd just like to add one more point here, and which is, if you've done the pattern recognition very thoroughly, the word semiotics in some way is almost irrelevant. The process of detailed pattern recognition is the real substance of creating effective design.
Right. Well, we have a question from India. By the way, the Tropicana branding was much better than the after can design go wrong at some point of time. We just sometimes think too much about it. I think it's an excellent comment, and I think the Tropicana is a famous example, and apologies to anybody who might have been involved in that, but a famous example of what I like to call changing the actor in the middle of the movie. So imagine if you were watching a movie and you've been following it for an hour or so, and you're really into the character and the story of the character and what the character is going to do next, and then all of a sudden, it becomes a completely different actor acting the same character. You're going to be confused and potentially a little upset, and your notion is probably going to be like, I'm getting out of here. I'm no longer interested in this movie because they don't know what they're doing. And I think the Tropicana example is one where we saw that happen in package design. We dramatically changed the nature and character of the brand midstream without consciously or strategically evolving that meaning, and consumers left the movie. They walked out of the theater, basically, and they had to scramble to try to fix that.
Just one more point about that. There was the original design shift was to try to address some of the sugar levels and the fact that people weren't drinking orange juice in the morning, a real functional aspect of the brand. And it was the real emotional components, that deeper connection to childhood permissions to enjoy something sweet, that were really everlasting and forced the brand to return to those ideals.
Yeah, Michael spearheaded, we worked on here a global research study of understanding the meaning behind some of Tropicana's brand values, which yielded a lot of really interesting learning on that, which we won't go into right now. So no more questions? Seems that semiotics and design decoding is a hot topic these days. Obviously, it's an effort to demystify design and establish ourselves as experts in meaningful visual communications with the consumer. With so many agents out there saying they do this, agencies out there saying they do this, how can we judge the quality of those insights?
So it's a good question. There's a lot of people talking about decoding design. We were just at the Fuse conference where it was a topic that came up. And I think we mentioned it before. It's about the quality of the pattern recognition. And in many ways, it's a process of designers being really good at looking and always looking, always being out in the world, looking at art history, being in museums. You can't just be like sitting at your computer all the time working. You got to get out in the world and be a field. You got to be an anthropologist.
Yeah, and certainly there's credentialed approaches as well. You know, you can talk about holding degrees, and again, semiotics can be very academic. I think one of the things that we strive to do is consistently and constantly train ourselves. So Michael and I are reading constantly. We attend seminars and conferences. We speak at seminars and conferences. As designers, we feel we're uniquely suited to bridge the gap between the academic science of semiotics and the application of semiotics, and how those can best be leveraged and used by designers. But when it comes right down to it, you know, it's the age-old question that we've been asking in the design business for so long. Do we need an accreditation like a bar exam, you know, in order to be seen as credible professionals and able to practice in a credible way in the world of design? Because right now anybody can buy an Apple and start doing design and call themselves a designer, in much the same way, you know, someone who is marginally aware of semiotics might put their shingle out and call themselves a semiotician. At the end of the day, for us, it's ROI. You know, just like everything else in design, we're charged with solving complex business problems, and if we can show you examples of how we've done that in powerful ways and made differences for brands, those are our best credentials in this space. But until we have a bar exam, you know, I don't know how we can get around some of that.
You just have to be kind of a Renaissance designer, having both a foot in the insights development process and the craftsmanship process.
Someone asked us what's the name of our forthcoming book. That's a bit of a debate right now. We had teed up a name, but our publishers think that we might need to have something that's a little bit more intuitive. Much like we avoided saying semiotics here, we're working on the name, but it has something to do with the idea of design genome. Michael and I have kind of coined that phrase to help us understand this idea of decoding and recoding. So I don't see any more questions, but we have great people from Mexico and India and all sorts of places. Fantastic.
Thank you very much.
We'll have our people make sure that when the title's ready, it'll be broadcast out there to you.
I think this is also being recorded and will be on YouTube at some point. So if you're interested in passing it along or seeing it for the second time, there's probably a way to do that.
All right. I think with that, we're going to sign off. Thanks, everybody, for your attention and your time. I know it's really hard to break away from work or dinner or whatever it is, whatever time it is, wherever you are, but we really appreciate it. We love this stuff, and we hope that you guys do too. And go out there and look for meaning.
Thank you.